Good afternoon, everyone. Mass media refers to a diverse array of media technologies that reach a large audience via mass communication. The technologies through which this communication takes place include a variety of outlets. Broadcast media transmit information electronically via media such as films, radio, recorded music, and of course, television. It really doesn't matter if it's CNN, ABC, NBC, MSNBC, Fox News, and all the other mass media that essentially give us propaganda and quote unquote misinformation to thwart information to control our minds. Now, you may not think this is some sort of mind bending, mind controlling platform where they just giving you information as they see it. But believe me, mass media has an agenda. Now, when we think about mass media, you also have to think that the police and media are two organizations that interact regularly. The relationship can be described as somewhat symbiotic. The media need the police to supply them with information about crime and crime patterns and people who commit those crimes. That's the interest to the readers, listeners, and viewers. So, what news media outlet do majority of you guys listen to and view? Does it control the way you think? Does it control the way you look at things? Because if you don't believe that mass media has any form of propaganda, then you have already been brainwashed. That's right, brainwashed. Because when we look at the movements within the Black community that has been thwarted, deterred, suppressed, majority of that has been by mass media, the same mass media that you guys contribute to, listen to, and view. And I would be a fool not to tell you the truth. So I think it's important to give context what I'm saying without just throwing out random accusations about certain media platforms. So I think it's important that I give you relevance to this. That way you can have something to essentially go off of. And with that being said, I would like to give credit to the author here, Carol Anderson. A lot of the information that I'll be reading here will be some from her book, White Rage. And I think it's very prevalent that you guys go out and support this sister because the information is very insightful and informing for you guys to understand how mass media and law enforcement have essentially duped the Black community time and time again. So with that being said, we need to understand that mass media fan the flames and then some with little to no evidence. News outlets warn that crack, reportedly the most addictive drug known to mankind, as galloping out of the crime-filled inner cities, and as Newsweek, one of the old news media platforms, claim rapidly spreading into the suburbs. The New York Times echoed the refrain identifying epidemic crack used for the Long Island to the wealthier suburbs of Westchester County. See, the media's overwhelming tendency to blacken crack. See, that's what they use. They blacken crack only added to the national panic. Because if you don't understand, ladies and gentlemen, between 1986 and 1987 and 76% of the articles, 76% of the articles in the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, the Washington Post, and the Los Angeles Times dealing with crack referred to Black Americans either directly or through code words like urban, inner city, etc. Whites were mentioned only 1/3 of the time. The message was clear. The Black Plague, that's right, the Black Plague was coming. The crack plague had already swept through Black American neighborhoods around the country with absolutely no warning. There had been minor use of crack in the 1970s, but it began to visibly show up in 1984 and exploded in 85 and 86, just as Congress cut off funding to the contrast, leaving the administration desperate to finance the war against the Saints. Now, as battles over lucrative drug turf escalated, Black communities were besieged with rampant gang violence. Most had no idea how this crack scourge had arisen or how those who had once toted simple handguns are now carrying AK-47s. How do we go from handguns to AK-47s in urban cities and all other types of automatic and military grade weapons? It was clear immediate that something had gone horribly wrong. I mean, a National Urban League report declared that gains made over the past 25 years, many of the result of the civil rights movement in the 1960s, was unraveled or will be unraveled unless steps are taken to arrest the pervasive problem of crime in the Black community. There was a research team from Harvard University and Chicago between 84 and 94 that the homicide rate for Black males aged 14 to 17 were then double the homicide rate for Black males 18 to 24, increased almost as much. I mean, the magnitude of the firepower and the sheer number of killings were in fact critical factors that led Black Americans' life expectancies rates to actually decline. Now, we understand the same rates in the early 90s as well as in DC, also known as the murder capital, and now even in modern day Chicago, known as the murder capital of the United States of America. See, something that not even slavery or Jim Crow had been able to accomplish. Moreover, many other sectors of the Black community were also horribly affected by murders and crack, fetal death rates, low birth weight babies, and children now in foster care. The researchers concluded that the perilous decline of Black Americans on so many quality of life indicators represents a break from decades of convergency between Blacks and whites on many of these measures. But they would have you to believe that you should just get up by the bootstraps and you work your way up as long as you lick a couple of boots along the way. But we need to understand that the divergence, however, was about to get exponentially worse because in 1986, Congress passed the Anti-Drug Abuse Act. Joe Biden was a part of that, which stipulated mandatory sentencing, emphasized punishment over treatment, and created the 100-to-1 disparity. Listen, 100-to-1 disparity in sentencing between crack and cocaine based on the myth that the cheap narcotic rock was more addictive than its powder form. Now, the NAACP explained law's 100-to-1 formation. A person must possess 500 grams of powder cocaine before they are subject to the same mandatory prison sentence of 5 years as an individual who is convicted of possessing just 5 grams of crack cocaine. That's right, because they understood that white Americans were doing the powder stuff and Black Americans were doing the rock. So a 100-to-1 disparities. So in order for you to get the same amount of time as a Black American who only had 5 grams of crack cocaine, their white counterparts and other rich people could have 500 grams of powder cocaine. Look at the disparity. Now, the National Urban League was convicted. The tougher sentencing police were not the answer. Now, the incarceration rate would be so high it warned that society would not be able to bear the cost. Congress, nonetheless, good old Congress, followed up in 1988 with an even harsher version of the Anti-Drug Abuse Act that instituted mandatory sentencing for even a first-time offense, added the death penalty for certain crimes where drugs were an aggravating factor, and denied housing and other human rights to those whose greatest crime was having a friend or family member in the drug trade even visit. Crimes against humanity. Where is the United Nations? That's right, nowhere to be found. The Supreme Court had played a critical role. The Supreme Court had played a critical role in tightening the noose. A series of cases beginning in 1968, but escalating dramatically in the Berger and Rehnquist eras, legalized racial discrimination in criminal justice system. The court. That's right, the same Supreme Court that they're about to elect or have elected a Black woman. Will that be changed? Clarence Thomas didn't change anything. But let's just go over some of the things that they did back in 1968 so we can see the things that are still occurring today in our law enforcement and by the way of communication and mass media. Now, the court affirmed that police, even though their overall racial bias is well documented, can stop anyone based on something far below the understood threshold of probable cause. Can I say that again, ladies and gentlemen? Because still to this day, the court affirmed that police, even though their overall racial bias is well documented, can stop anyone based on something far below the understood threshold of probable cause. The same thing as we know today as stop and frisk. The court approved racial profiling. The court upheld harsh mandatory sentencing for drug offenses. The court tossed out irrefutable evidence of racial bias in sentencing because of its implication for the entire criminal justice systems and required instead proof of overt visual discrimination against the individual defendant to support a claim of violation of equal protection under the law. The court approved as the justices openly admitted ridiculously preempted strikes to eliminate blacks from a jury so long as the prosecutor stated rationale was not based on race. So they can essentially have an all-white jury according to the Supreme Court. The court ruled that police could use their discretion instead of probable cause to search motorists for drugs. Yeah, they could just by discretion. Well, let's stop him because he might have drugs. We know this still happens today. See, I'm showing you how nothing has changed in law enforcement. Nothing has changed in mass media because the propaganda is still revolving and very relevant today. The court found that pretext traffic stops, for example, having a busted tail light or not using a turn signal are illegal and permissible rules for police to hunt for drugs. So there you are, fail to change lane with the turn signal and you get pulled over and here they are searching for drugs. This is all constituted, all allowed by the court. Now, taken together, those rulings allow, indeed encourage the criminal justice systems to run racially amok because what neighborhoods and environments are over police? The Black community. What environment and communities are under police when people actually need help? The Black community. Now, we need to understand certain things in history, certain things in time, like back in July 23rd, 1999 in Tallulah, Texas. In the dead of the night, local police launched a massive raid and busted a major cocaine trafficking ring, or at least that's how it was billed by the local media, which after having been tipped off, lined up to get the best, most humiliating photographs of 46 of the town's 5,000 residents. All of them were Black, handcuffed in pajamas, underwear, and uncombed bed hair, being paraded into the jail for booking. The local newspaper, the Tallulah Sentinel, ran the headlines, Tallulah streets cleared of garbage. That's what the news wrote for the headliner. Tallulah streets cleared of garbage. The editorial praised law enforcement for ridding Tallulah of drug dealing scumbags. The raid was the result of an 18-month investigation by a man who will be named by Texas Attorney General as an outstanding lawman of the year. Attached to the federally funded Panhandle Regional Narcotic Task Force, based in Amarillo, about 50 miles away from Tallulah, Tom Coleman didn't lead a team of investigators. Instead, he single-handedly identified each member of this massive cocaine operation and made more than 100 undercover drug purchases. He was hailed as a hero, and his testimony immediately led to 38 of the 46 being convicted, with the other cases just wanting to get into the claw court system. Joe Moore, a pig farmer, was sentenced to 99 years for selling $200 worth of cocaine to the undercover narcotics agent, Kizzy. White received 25 years, while her husband, William Cashlove, landed 434 years for possessing 1 ounce of cocaine. The case began to unravel, however, when Kenzie's sister, Tanya, went to trial. Coleman swore that she had sold him drugs. Tanya, however, had video proof that she was at a bank in Oklahoma City 300 miles away, cashing a check at the very same moment he claimed to have bought cocaine from her. This is how law enforcement has, for a very long time, for hundreds of years, have always falsely incarcerated and mistreated and gave misinformation so they can spew the propaganda and misinformation and fake news to everyone so people can be okay in justifying and lynching Black people. And I don't just mean by lynching by the way of a noose. I mean by hundreds of years of incarceration, as stated here, 434 years of possessing 1 ounce of cocaine. Then another defendant, Billy Don Wafer, had timesheets of his boss' eyewitness testimony that Wafer was at work and not out selling drugs to Coleman. That's what his employer said. His white employer said, no, he wasn't out selling drugs. He was at work. And when the outstanding lawman of the year swore under oath that he had purchased cocaine from Bryant, a tall, bushy-haired man, only to have Bryant, bald and 5'6", appear in court, it finally became very clear that something was totally wrong. Coleman, in fact, had no proof whatsoever that any of the alleged drug deals had taken place. There were no audio tapes, no photograph, no witnesses, no other police officers present, no fingerprints, but his on the bags of drugs. No records over the span of an 18-month investigation. He never wore a wire. He had absolutely no proof. He claimed to have written each drug transaction on his leg, but to have washed away the evidence accidentally when he showered. This is white tyranny at its best. Additionally, investigation led to no proof of his allegations, and when the police arrested those 46 people and rigorously searched their homes and possessions, no drugs were found. So an 18-month investigation of one man pulled out 46 people from their homes at night to have the newspaper to run that story without any proof. No audio tapes, no photograph, no witnesses, no other police, no fingerprints, no wire recordings, nothing, nada. But this is how law enforcement and mass media work in tangent. They work in a symbiotic relationship to show not only the world, but somehow convince other Black people that Black people are inherently evil, that Black people are inherently bad. And I'm just giving you one story. We know that there's millions of these stories out there. But no drugs were found. No weapons, no money, no paraphernalia, or any other indications at all that the housewife, the pig farmer, or anyone else arrested were actually drug kingpins. What was discovered, however, was judicial misconduct running rampant in the war on drugs in Tallulah, Texas, with a clear racial bias. Coleman perjured himself on the stand when he claimed to be an upstanding, law-abiding citizen. In fact, he was under indictment for theft in his previous position as a deputy sheriff in another county. So they have a criminal working in the law enforcement, as we always see today, reporting crimes that he had no proof of, and then come to find out he himself is a criminal. The prosecutor, Terry McErin, knew about this but failed to disclose it to the defense attorney. See, this is how in law enforcement, you just can't say the police, the district attorney, the assistant district attorney, and all those other law enforcement agents that work in that environment failed to disclose this information prior to this quote unquote lawman of the year got up on the stand to allegedly give false accusations of 46 Black upstanding citizens of the Tallulah community. And what did the mass media do? They ran a story stating, Tallulah streets cleared of garbage. Thank you for getting those drug dealing scumbags off the streets. But Coleman perjured himself. That's right. In fact, he was under indictment for theft in a previous position as a deputy sheriff in another county. See, the district attorney also ensured that there were no Black Americans on the jury in each trial. There were no Black Americans on the jury in each trial of 46 Black Americans being tried, being prosecuted on false accusations with no evidence. Again, ladies and gentlemen, there were no audio tapes, no photographs, no wiretapes, no record of illegal activity, but they still got locked up. Now, Judge Edward Self, who presided over the lion's share of the trials, publicly expressed his support for the prosecutors and sealed Coleman's employment records, including the charge of embezzlement as a deputy sheriff. So the judge himself sealed this criminal's record to hide his past, so he then would incriminate himself and perjure himself while he was on the stand, giving false testimony about the 46 Black people that he falsely accused. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't even need to go to present day. This has been a current and consistent track record of law enforcement and mass media controlling the narrative and painting Black people as the scum of the earth. We have to understand that the judicial malfeasance immediately took on racial undertones. Coleman, a white man who routinely referred to Black Americans as niggers, had accused 10% of the Tallulah's Black population of dealing in cocaine based on his word and his word alone. 50% of all the Black men in the town were indicted, convicted, and sentenced to prison. 50%. Now, of the 6 white and Latinos who were arrested in the raid, so I stand corrected, it was 40 of Black people and 6 white Latinos. They all had relationships, family and friends with Tallulah's Black community. See, and that's the thing. Anytime Latinos and white people are friends of Black Americans, yeah, they want to get you too. They want to show their white cronies and Latino cronies, you're going to pick a side and it's going to be the white side. You're not going to divest into the Black community. This is how they keep us divided and separated. That's why we don't have any brown friends. That's why we essentially don't have any white riders inside of our communities that will really, really stand up for us. Yeah, they'll get on the road, they'll march, they'll pump their fists. But you don't see any iconic Latinos or white people standing up for the atrocity and the humane treatment of Black Americans. But you will understand the white community consistently denied their race played any role in this. White people are like, nah, they weren't racist. They were all drug dealers, but all of them were innocent. All of them got set free because there was no proof at all. Even when they searched their homes, they didn't even find any paraphernalia, not even a joint. The speed and efficiency in which the criminal justice system worked to sentence Black defendants and their white and Latino friends to decades in prison based solely on the unsubstantiated testimony of a man under indictment suggests otherwise. Now, this guy, Randy Credo of the William Moses Cutler Fund for Racial Justice, called Tallulah a mass lynching, taking down 50% of the male Black adult population like that is outrageous. It's like being accused of raping someone in Indiana in the 1930s. You didn't do it, but it doesn't matter because a bunch of Klansmen on the jury are going to string you up anyway. We see that here today. We see that all the time. I'm white and I say so. He did it. He raped her. He wasn't even in town. He was actually 600 miles away. He raped her. We don't care. But this was in 1930. It was the beginning of the 21st century and a powerful civil rights movement that bridged those two eras. Yet now felony convictions, chiefly via the war on drugs, replaced the explicit use of race as a mechanism to deny Black Americans their right as citizens. We're talking about disfranchisement, permanent based on jury service and legal discrimination in employment, housing, and education. Despite the civil rights legislation of the 1960s, are now all burdens carried by those who have been incarcerated. That burden had been disproportionately shouldered by the Black community, which, although only 13% of the nation's population, makes up 45% of those incarcerated. 13% of the nation's population of Black Americans make up 45% of those incarcerated. Even more disconcertingly, these felony convictions have had little to do with ensuring the safety and security of the nation. In most cases, target the wrong culprits, target the wrong people, target the wrong community. Logically speaking, given the poor state of the schools, crushing poverty, and the lack of viable living wage options for large groups of Black Americans, the Black population, Black American drug use should mirror the staggering incarceration rates. According to Human Rights Watch, the proportion of Blacks in prison population exceeds the proportion among state residents in every single state. In Missouri, for example, Black Americans make up 11.2% of the state residents, but 41.2% of those incarcerated. How are you 11% of a state, but you make up 41% of those incarcerated? In 20 states, the percentages of Black incarcerated is at least 5 times greater the share of resident population. But there is no direct correlation between drug use and incarceration. But see, they always would like to relate the Black incarceration percentage to Black people. They said, well, majority of Black people are in jail for 2 things: a drug-related crime and some sort of assault or murder. Because despite all the economic and social pressures that Black Americans confront, we have shown an amazing resiliency in the face of drugs. Indeed, there are among the least likely drug users of all racial and ethnic groups in the United States of America. Yes, we're the least likely to do drugs in the harshest conditions, living with the lowest wages, living in some of the most torn. Some of our cities look like Ukraine of today. Like it has totally been bombarded. But no, they've been degraded. They've been deteriorating. They have been upkept. But some people would say, well, you destroyed your own neighborhoods. You know how old some of these ghettos and hoods are? But now they're being wiped away with gentrification. At one point in time, your rent would be $700 for a 2-bedroom apartment with all your utilities included. Now, some of those same neighborhoods are around $1,500 for a 1-bedroom, and you pay for all your utilities. And they understand that majority of Black Americans make no more than $50,000 a year. You can't afford a 1-bedroom apartment at $1,500 and pay your utilities when you have 2 kids that you're taking care of as well. Now, despite all of the stereotypes, we are among the least likely to sell drugs too. Yep, I said it. When people don't understand how drugs actually reach the United States of America. Now, we understand how cocaine was actually introduced into the Black community by the way of the CIA, allegedly. But when you go to California and you go to certain places in Washington and around the US, did you know that whites, Latinos, and Asians deal more in drugs than Black Americans? Oh, yeah. Ask some of these people who their plug are. I'll just say that, say the least. Just ask some people who their plug are, and you will get that information in matter-of-factly. There was a major study out of the University of Washington revealed, even when confronted with irrefutable evidence of whites' engagement with the illegal drug trade, listen to this. This is a study from the University of Washington. They revealed, even when confronted with irrefutable evidence of whites' engagement with the illegal drug trade, law enforcement has continued to focus its efforts on the Black population. Because after the civil rights movement, when Black Americans were making incredible strides in education, voting, employment, business, those gains were a threat to the status quo of inequality. The United States did not face a crime problem that was racialized, it faced a race problem that was criminalized.